Hello Tyler, this is the story of Mr. Topsy-Turvy. Mr. Topsy-Turvy was a funny sort of fellow. Everything about him was either upside down or inside out or back to front topsy-turvy. In fact, it was all very extraordinary. To give you some idea of how topsy-turvy Mr. Topsy-Turvy was, you ought to see his house. The front door is upside down to start with, and the curtains hang upside down at the windows, and just look at that chimney pot. All very extraordinary. Inside is the same. Just look at the clock standing on Mr. Topsy-Turvy's mantelpiece. Isn't that the topsiest-turviest clock you've ever seen? Which isn't it? All the numbers are in the wrong place. And just look at the way Mr. Topsy-Turvy reads a book. Not only does he read it upside down, but he starts to read at the back page. Dearie, dearie. And just look where Mr. Topsy-Turvy puts the stamp when he sends a letter to somebody. Have you ever seen anything like it? No, see, no, this is not good. Now, this story is all about the time Mr. Topsy-Turvy came to the town where you and I live. Nobody is quite sure how Mr. Topsy-Turvy got there or where he came from, but he did arrive because somebody saw him getting off the train. The trouble was he did it in a topsy-turvy way and got out on the wrong side and fell onto the railway line, which really isn't at all that surprising, is it? Where are we? Here we go. When he'd picked himself up and managed to find his way out of the station, Mr. Topsy-Turvy went to a hotel to find a room to spend the night. See, he's still got his hat on upside down and he's carrying a bag by the bottom. That's good. Right. The hotel manager tried not to smile when he saw Mr. Topsy-Turvy walk into his hotel carrying his suitcase upside down with his topsy-turvy hat on his head. "Good afternoon, sir," he said. "Can I help you?" Now, something you didn't know about Mr. Topsy-Turvy is the way he speaks. You see, he sometimes gets things the wrong way round. I wonder what he's going to say. "Afternoon, good," said Mr. Topsy-Turvy to the hotel manager. "Odd room alike." The manager scratched his head. "You mean you'd like a room?" he asked. "Please, yes," replied Mr. Topsy-Turvy. Eventually, the hotel manager managed to work out what Mr. Topsy-Turvy was talking about, and he was taken up in the lift to a bedroom. Then Mr. Topsy-Turvy unpacked his suitcase, put on his pyjamas, and went to bed. He was rather tired, after all, travelling from wherever he'd come from. The following day, Mr. Topsy-Turvy went round the town. But what a fuss his going around the town caused. He took a taxi from the hotel, but so confused the taxi driver telling him where he wanted to go, the poor man drove straight into a traffic light. "Oh dear," said Mr. Topsy-Turvy, I am sorry, very." Then he went to a big department store in the middle of town. He walked up to one of the counters. "I'd like a sock of pears," he said to the lady behind the counter. "You mean a pair of socks?" She smiled and showed him a pair of bright red socks. Mr. Topsy-Turvy put them on his hands. Ooh, a bit silly. Then he tried to leave, but being Mr. Topsy-Turvy, he tried to walk down the up escalator, and the people who were going up the up escalator all fell over themselves. It was a terrible topsy-turvy jumble. That day, Mr. Topsy-Turvy did all sorts of topsy-turvy things. He walked backwards across a street crossing and caused an enormous traffic jam. He went to a library and put all the books upside down on the shelves and made everybody extremely cross. Then he went to an art gallery and insisted on hanging all the pictures upside down so that he could look at them properly. Dearie, dearie, it's not good, is it? And then, after Mr. Topsy-Turvy had been in the town for just one day, he disappeared. Nobody knew how he went or where he went, but he certainly went because he wasn't there anymore. The whole town breathed a sigh of relief. But what the town discovered, even though Mr. Topsy-Turvy had left, was that everything was still topsy-turvy. "Read all it about," shouted the newspaper sellers, instead of shouting, "Read all about it." "News is the here," said the television newsreader, instead of saying, "Here is the news." "Morning good," people started saying to each other when they met, and do you how instead of how do you do. Everybody was talking topsy-turvy. Can you think of something to say that's topsy-turvy? Go on, try. Okay, Tyler, good night. For bedtime. See, time for bed. Bed for time. Haha. Right. And tomorrow we have got Mr. Silly. Well, you're not Mr. Silly, are you really? No, I think you're Mr. Silly sometimes. And the next one's Mr. Uppity. Ooh, we are that one, definitely. Sometimes. But Nana loves you. Heaps and heaps and heaps. And I'm missing you so very much, darling. But hopefully, in this topsy-turvy world, things will go right. And then we will see each other. And I will make you spaghetti bolognese. And donuts and jelly. And Kit Kats. And Moams. And all sorts of other loveliness. Oh, and waffles for breakfast. Dearie me, I'm going to have to remember how to do all of these things, aren't I? Bad news is we planted the potatoes at the allotment this morning. And I don't think you like potatoes, which is a shame because they look rather good going in. Anyway, nighty-night. I love you loads and loads and loads. Be good as gold for Daddy. And you take care as well, Chris. Nighty-night. Love you. Bye-bye. Love you, love you, love you.